Hello friends, for today's video we're going to be looking at part 2 of Attack on Titan's series finale. Before jumping into specifics, I do want to say that I have had a phenomenal time watching this show, and I think just the fact that I was making videos that were anywhere from 20 plus minutes to almost an hour long for small batches at a time just goes to show how much there is to dig into. I have found that I have been so nervous of being spoiled for the events of the story that I haven't really had the opportunity to engage with all of you all that much about your thoughts. And I want to remedy that. So over on my community tab, the day this video goes up, and because a lot of the conversation today is going to be surrounding the ending and what it all means, I want to hear your thoughts. I know how fandom culture can be. I know sometimes people maybe have a certain opinion, but they feel like they can't share it on certain Reddit threads or in certain spaces because if you have quote unquote the wrong opinion, then people just kind of shoot you down or make you feel stupid. And I think it'd be a lot of fun to have a place where we can kind of come together and vocalize our interpretations of the ending. I'll have that post, as I said, the day that this video goes up. All of that said, though, jumping into it, this will be the only time I chat about this show without any notes, because there were so many various things that were, I don't want to say that they went over them really quickly at the end, but so much happened. I've been dwelling on these things for so long and really thinking through them. We'll start with the biggest thing, which is Eren's descent into villainy, madness, however you want to think of it. I have periodically been stating that I don't really feel like Eren was entirely himself. I think that this originated from the moment that he touched Krista's hand, as her being somebody of royal blood allowed him to sort of see into more of the events of what were to come and what has happened, those sorts of things. So I feel like since that moment, he's been somewhat spiraling. I think he's been losing his grasp on reality quite a bit as things progressed, and he got closer and closer to this, you could argue, predetermined fate. The more that it made it so that his grasp on reality became even looser. I worded something last week that I feel the way I said it sort of captures my thoughts, and I'm going to repeat it again. When we were seeing Mikasa saying she wants to bring him home, she wants to save him, and I was kind of like, I don't think that's going to happen. I kind of feel like we gotta end this, you know? I said, can you imagine the guilt that he would feel? Let's say he wasn't fully in control, or even if he was fully in control. Obviously, his conversation with the boy and certain glimpses that we see here and there, and then of course, things that we see within this episode, he obviously feels a tremendous amount for what is going to happen and thus what has happened. And because time is somewhat warped in his mind, you could kind of argue it has already happened in his perspective, but regardless, what I was saying is that, can you imagine Mikasa if she does save him and he survives? How would life look then for him moving forward? Because that would just be plaguing him for the rest of his life. Thing is, that is who he has been for the last 5 or so years. And I think that's why when you get the flashback of him and the other scouts who went to this other place and were kind of experiencing the outside world, they were going to try to make pleas, and he kind of seemed more like himself, and then that's when he left shortly after. There was something about that moment when he met Ramsay that really clicked for him, that there really is nothing he can do to change his fate, which I can't even fathom for somebody who cares so much about freedom to be locked into this certain fate and to be locked into a fate that is so terrible. And you do see him say that he tried to do what he could to break free from it, but ultimately there was nothing that he could do, and like everything just kept playing out the way that he foresaw. There's something about going to this new place and seeing this boy who he never knew that really stood out to him, because it'd be one thing if certain things played out with the people around you, and then you're getting these glimpses of destruction somewhere else. That, I think, would maintain this almost dreamlike state. But then once you actually go to the other place and you're seeing the very people that you're going to be killing, I feel like that just almost affirms that you have no choice in the matter. I think a lot of my interpretations of the ending are sort of more so rooted in the actions of the characters and certain expressions they have, certain things we've been shown, as opposed to the things that they've literally been telling us. One theory I can certainly understand, but I don't necessarily agree with, is that this is truly what Eren wanted from just purely himself, and he wasn't influenced in any way by Ymir or what I'm going to call the parasite, that he wasn't influenced by them whatsoever. It was purely what he wanted, and the reason people might think this is because you do see him tell the boy as he's crying, like, but I wanted this, and you also see him saying that the world wasn't like what he saw in Armin's book. And there are those moments where he's speaking to Armin, and there are these sort of flashbacks where he goes back and forth between, not flashbacks necessarily, but he's going and switching back and forth between being an adult and being a child, and he's kind of throwing a tantrum, and then other times he seems completely dead-eyed and absent and almost like he's not focused and he's totally lost. And that sort of reaffirms for me the idea of him being not having a firm grasp on reality. But I can see there being some people who genuinely felt that what he was saying, that they're taking it at face value. And I could understand that because I think it makes sense. This is what the character is saying, and so why wouldn't you believe it? And I think for me, part of why I don't take it necessarily as 100% truth, and I should specify the specific things that he's saying. He's saying, as I've noted, that the world wasn't what it looked like in Armin's book and that he wanted this. He would do this again. I've killed 80% of the world. I would do it again. Or I will do this, but this is what I wanted. I still kind of wonder if he doesn't even not only have a firm grasp on reality as far as when he's in these glimpses of the future versus when he's actually in the present of what that future was showing him. I don't know that he always has that clear, but I also don't even always think he knows what he wants because he is now sort of inextricably tied to Ymir. So I feel like their motivations have been blended together. But when, if you hear that this is what he wanted, then I can see you being like, yeah, Eren sucks and this is stupid. I could totally see that. I just didn't really take it that way. And I also think part of the reason that I think it'd be fun to see other people's interpretations of the ending is that I can only imagine how both of these viewpoints, mine being I still and have repeatedly said, I don't think he's fully in control. I can see some people hearing what I'm saying and just deciding, like, you just don't want it to be this way. And you're just, like, looking for any little thing to believe that that's not actually it. And then I could see the other side where people are like, this is stupid. I don't like this. Seriously, he's just mad. It wasn't like Armin's book, so he wanted to destroy mankind so that it could just be lava and water. This is dumb. I could see some people being like, are you serious? You couldn't even point out all of the other instances. It's like you just take something at face value and that's that. Okay, you don't do any additional digging. Like, I can just see people having arguments and projecting a little bit because I do feel like fandom culture sort of, they put down other people's opinions so they feel better about themselves sometimes, and I'm not really a fan of that, but I digress. I don't know, regardless, even though I think it is an interesting debate how much this was his decision versus whether it wasn't. I don't know how much that really is the entirety of what I want to focus on today because we have talked about that quite a bit already leading up to this. But I do want to note how it's almost a question of, okay, but 80% is a lot. That's a lot, and I there is a question of, okay, but if this had never happened, does that mean the entirety of the Eldian race would have been wiped out? And then that would have led to more war anyway, and people would have found, well, if the Eldians weren't entirely wiped out and Marley kept using Titans, then the Titans might have gotten to a point where even though you see at the beginning of the season that there's weapons that are starting to be used that have the ability to definitely basically overpower Titans, there is still this idea that we're just going to find the next weapon of mass destruction to use against other human beings. And I kind of feel like the very end is proving that to some degree, which isn't me saying like, so it's justified because then at least we could have some peace for a while. I'm not really saying that. But I have to complain about one tiny thing, which it's the fact that the screen is tiny when they're showing this sort of montage of the years after. Okay, can you not make the screen really small as the credits are rolling and then make it hard to see what's happening? I'd prefer if it just was the majority of the screen. But anyway, so the very end, you see a world without walls, and you do ask the questions of, oh my gosh, was this really the only way we could have a world without walls? Is this really the only way the Eldians could know a life without oppression? And then you see at least decades, if not centuries, go by, and then it gets destroyed anyway. And you're like, no, after all of that, it all gets destroyed, and you don't know, is it the majority of the planet destroyed itself? Is it just this city? I wouldn't imagine, based off of how much time has passed, that this is the world banding together to try and once again eliminate the Eldians because they saw them as a threat, and they continue to see them as a threat after the rumbling. I don't know that it's a direct retaliation of that. I think it's more so kind of emphasizing a theme that has been present throughout, which is that the cycles of violence do always continue to some degree, and that everything sort of repeats itself. So even though, they got rid of the Titans, which was Eren's goal all along, I will say, that was, he did succeed in that. But anyway, even though they got rid of the Titans, which were, especially when you have a specific Titan that has the powers that Eren had, to destroy all of that is almost like, okay, now we're going to start from a place where humanity can unite, and we can not have all this squabbling and this bloodshed and us versus them and dehumanizing other groups of people. We can all come together and we can start anew, but eventually somebody will create weapons again, and then those will be used again. You have to also kind of ask the question of, when he says 80% of the population, even though that number is always going to be horrific, what's the number itself? That's a percentage, but like, what's the number? What does 80% equal? And when you see at the very end where this whole city is decimated, and you do wonder if that means other cities are also being decimated, then what's the number at that point? So it's sad because you watch this horrifying scene, and then you're left with this tiny glimpse of hope of like, well, that was horrible, and I'm not necessarily saying it was worth it, but maybe there's something that we can have now, that humanity can come together, only to see that humanity not just repeats the same thing again, but maybe even more deaths as a result of the fact that populations had the time to grow. It's awful. But also, I do respect it. It's heartbreaking, but I don't know that I ever expected, the further and further I got into this show, I don't know that I was expecting it to end on a chipper note. I don't think that would be in keeping with the general tone of the story or the themes, because I don't think the themes really are saying, if we can just set aside our differences, everything would work out. It's kind of like, yeah, it would, but people are going to continue to be terrible. I mean, I feel like, to summarize, the theme is like, don't people suck? Yeah, they do. I also want to say, I'm sure there are plenty of theories, and I don't know. I don't know how I feel about the boy that goes into the tree, and if they're going to find something similar to the parasite again when they go into that tree, or if it's just sort of to leave you off with this, like, well, maybe humanity is going to start over again because everything looks very desolate, and plant life has kind of grown over, which means time has passed, and now we're going to see once again a society that has these tiny pieces of the past, and they're going to try to build from there. But are they going to find also something, what I'm going to call evil? Are they going to find something evil again? Are they going to find some form of power again? Or is there something sort of pure about coming back to nature. It was really dark. I think even though it was heartbreaking, that I do appreciate that we kept in line with what we've been saying all along. As much as I will say, I was like, can we just have a break? At least Falco and Gabby are like planting trees now. You know, they're just happily hanging out together. That's nice. So at least there's that. I was terrified when it seemed like, okay, finally we've defeated this parasite and Eren, and then the stupid parasite started emitting that stuff into the air that started turning all the Eldians into Titans, and I was like, not Sean, no, he has to make it, please, because at this point, I was like, okay, you took Hanji from me, you took Erwin from me, and I've been slowly being like, you know, I feel like Sean's underhyped, and I don't hype him up enough, and then there's that part where him and Connie are sort of like, well, this is it, and I was like, no, but they were fine. I was kind of incorrect I did leave room for this other possibility, but I was pretty sure it was the other thing, and I was wrong, which is that way back when you get that glimpse of Zeke as a boy and he's playing with a toy, and the toy looks like the Beast Titan, so that means the Beast Titans always looked like that. It's not like he saw that and was like, that's what I want to be. And I was wrong. I mean, I was correct that the other ones take the form of the Titans, but the Beast Titan gets to have kind of whatever they want to be, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. And like Falco becoming a falcon, basically, I was like, awesome. There were a lot of like, here comes the cavalry moments in this last section, so even though it was devastating, there were some like, yeah, let's go. There was one moment I didn't love, which was when they were trying to identify which Titan exactly had Armin, and Mikasa's trying to like point out, and she doesn't know the name of the animal, and they're like, that one, I don't know, a boar, a pig, and it felt like it was supposed to be funny, and I was like, guys, we're stomping on millions of, or I don't know how many, but we're stomping on a lot of people. This isn't really the time. I'm okay being given the hype, you know, give me the hype of them trying to save the day, that's fine, but I don't know that I need this so much. I don't know, maybe other people were like, I needed the joke, but for me, I was just kind of like, feels like maybe not the best placement. Sticking to the action, there were a couple of other things that were like, oh, that was awesome. One of them was the way that the cart titan peak just kind of can consistently just reform, so as long as she is able to do that, she can just keep going, where you're like, oh, and she's just kind of stuck it out. That was cool. The scene with Mikasa where the wings show up was awesome. I can only imagine. Somebody has to have done incredible fan art for that, right? I feel like a number of people have, because that was a pretty iconic image right there. I can't tell exactly how I feel just at the moment about the fact that Levi finally got Zeke. I was kind of like, I mean, all right. I was, okay. Him handing out candy at the end, I was like, oh, this is kind of bittersweet. Because you see, of course, his backstory at the beginning of season 3. And the way that he was this malnourished, neglected child. So for him to just be nicely passing out the stuff to the kids, I was like, oh my gosh. I wonder how Levi feels. We don't really know that. We don't know how he feels by the end. But he was great. I mean, they did kind of consistently have to find ways to keep him out of the action, because they established that he is absurdly overpowered, so the only way that they could make things have high stakes was like, well, how can we remove Levi from the equation? But it was sad to see him being injured in this last moment and trying to basically save everybody. I did like the way that kind of previous Titans ultimately sort of came around to helping and fighting on their side. I thought that was pretty cool. And then, and then we had to kill Eren, and we sort of finally tap into these flashbacks, and you see him. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but I'll dive into this a little bit more now. I did appreciate, I know I said this, but I really want to emphasize the way that he is so back and forth between being a small child and being an adult when he's talking to Armin, and he's having these tantrums and throwing these hissy fits. I do wonder if some people were like so overjoyed and ecstatic when they're like, oh, see, he does love Mikasa. And I'm like, I mean, I already kind of felt like that was the situation. I I didn't feel like that was some big reveal, because before, I already had a feeling that he was telling her what he was telling her, one, so that she could get the job done when it came to this moment, but also because for the time being, he was trying to sort of push her away. And then you also see, and I noted this, that when he was kind of going through the flashbacks of his life, he looks at her as a child, and he kind of lingers on that. And on top of that, I'm pretty sure when his head gets shot off, that he like, that's like the first thing he thinks about is Mikasa. So I'm like, I mean, yeah, I feel like I already knew this, but I can understand it being like kind of nice to hear, like, oh good, he didn't always hate Mikasa, because that was very harsh. But I still feel like in this moment he is so lost, and Armin, I think, had a very Armin moment, which this as well can be perceived in a number of ways. I think Armin sort of sitting down with him and being like, basically like, I'm here for you. I feel like this is just in line with Armin not really being someone to pass judgment on others. If anything, he's sort of a character that's like, allow me to sort of help you carry this burden. And I think he even says something similar to that when he's talking to Eren. I think Armin sees him as, wow, okay, so he is just, this isn't necessarily the friend I had growing up that was always so sure of himself. And I think this is more so a person whose mind maybe has, at the very least, somewhat fractured, understandably, because where even am I right now, and where is he, and where is his mind? So I think him sort of sitting down, it was like to provide comfort to Eren, knowing that things were going to go poorly. At least there was this idea of like, but you know, you always were there for me. I'm there for you right now. I don't perceive this personally as him being like, it's totally fine that you're going to kill 80% of the population. Like, that's no big deal. We're in it together. That's not how I took it. I also wonder if he didn't necessarily quite in that moment even fully understand the extent, because Eren's saying these things. And I know Armin will, you know, have seen all of the bloodshed, but I think in this exact moment there is sort of this like, what's up with you? I don't even know. He's almost rambling. Eren's almost just rambling. So I think it makes sense that Armin would just be like, okay. I also want to mention with Ymir, because there is a part where they're saying something about people wonder, there must have been a reason why she didn't fight back. And the thing that we've never understood is that it's because she loved the king. And this is another thing. I'm so sorry that this is kind of a consistent recurring thought throughout this discussion, but I think this is another thing that at face value, you're like, seriously? Okay. But having seen her backstory and watching the amount of abuse that she endured as a child and then all the way into her adulthood, and abuse in so many different ways. She's already having this foreign thing sort of invading her body, the parasite. Then she has this king make her his concubine. He never treats her as a human being. He just sees her as something to fight his battles for him, to have children for him. And then her own body is used to be eaten by her children. So everything about her is a matter of serving him. And I talked about in a previous discussion the way that so often people who are experiencing some form of oppression, and I'll extend that to say some form of abuse, they are so eager to remove the pain that they will sort of do anything they have to ensure that they are no longer harmed. And this is specifically involving somebody who this was put onto them since the time they were so young. The one time that they even kind of rebelled by allowing this small little pig to get out of the pen, they were brutalized and they were harmed. And as I said, this was sort of the beginning of having their body invaded by this foreign thing, and then having the king use them over and over and over again. So I think the question would be, well then, why wouldn't they fight back? They're the ones with the power at this point. But I think that almost does I don't want to say it does a disservice to the mindset that people sometimes can be in when they've been abused. But I think that it's not as simple as just like, oh, she was in love because like Stockholm syndrome. I think that's kind of a potential takeaway, but I feel that she so much had just been mistreated over and over and over again. And so she was doing anything she could so that when she is kind of being praised, like, because there is a sense almost of like, she's my weapon and she's like the mother of my children. She gives me this power. There's almost like this mistaken, maybe the characters would interpret that feeling she had as love, and maybe she even would have categorized it as love and thought of it that way. But it's more so like there's a extreme sense of relief when you finally feel like, oh, okay, they're not gonna... It's like in certain movies and shows when there's a character who thinks that someone's about to hit them, and then instead of hitting them, the person sort of like hugs them, and then they receive it really, like they're very accepting of it, and they seem like so relieved. And obviously there's a sense of like, oh, good, they didn't just harm me, they didn't just hit me. But it's almost like you're sad when you watch those kinds of scenes because you're like, oh, but like, you know, this is not good though. Like you should get away, you should fight back. And instead it's just like, oh, good, they're not hurting me. And then that sort of like, there's like this gratitude that can come about. Oh, they're showing me vulnerability, and they eventually get around to just interpreting that as an affection they want consistently. And when it's been drilled into them over and over and over again to protect this person, and doing so is what allows them to not be hurt, then I don't even know that it would cross her mind to use her Titan form to fight back. Would it have been extremely satisfying? Of course. It would have been great because that person was horrible. But this is now, I feel like, her fighting back. But she herself, her mind is so lost, I think just over we don't know how many years because, well, we kind of do, the whole like 2,000 years thing. We kind of have an idea of the time. But I mean, she's been stuck in this place and sort of just continuing to build and build and build and serve and serve and serve for so long. I think it's just gotten worse over time. And also, again, I don't understand or fully know, and I don't know that we ever would fully know the full extent of the parasite's influence, but I imagine that's playing a role as well. So I don't think it's a simple like, oh, she loved him, she was willing to do anything for him. I don't know if I take it quite that way. Also, tying this to Eren, when she is sort of locked into this place where time is hard to pin down, she does take on her child form again. And you do see Eren at times taking on his child form within this last few scenes that we get with him. I do think there's something to be said of the fact that Ymir never really seems to be going into her adult form, and I wonder if it's very intentionally because the last time that she fought back was when she was a child. So I think there's like something within her that's just been waiting. But if there's agreement, I don't know if there is, but if some of you maybe agree with the idea that Eren's not fully in control because the last 5 years and his mind and his sense of reality and time have been warped, then that times 1,000 basically for her. And when you have these two sort of meshing together, I can see the way that her will and his will would become intermingled. I'm sort of just reinforcing the theories that I've had leading up to this. It was ultimately sad. It was really sad that this turned into what it did. But I think that there was care put into why Eren ultimately does become the weapon he becomes, and the trauma that he experienced, the trauma that she experienced, and all the ways that this ties into systems of oppression and the idea of fighting back and rebelling, and at what cost that we have the walls literally and metaphorically broken down. I think all of that was exceptionally well handled. I do want to know when Eren said something along the lines of, I made the Titan go to my mother that day. And there was a small part of me that thought, I don't really think that would have been possible. So this once again is making me think that he doesn't always know when it's something he wants and something he did versus when it was Ymir technically. Because at that point, he didn't have the Titan. And I understand that sometimes the people who will become Titans can glimpse into the futures. Like, you even see Falco, when he's first introduced, is having this vision. But, and I do want to know, I kind of feel like we've had hints of that since the very opening, because when Eren first wakes up in that field by the tree, which, you know, there's all that symbolism, but I kind of think that we've had glimpses of the fact that his mind had these pieces implanted, but I don't know that when he was a child, he could have literally have forced in that moment. I mean, he wouldn't be aware that he was doing it then, but there's almost this idea of like, well, future Eren would have gone into this moment and controlled this Titan to go after his mom, which would have impacted present day / past Eren. I don't know if I think that's quite the situation. I think it's more so that he wouldn't have had control over them at that point because he wasn't the coordinate yet, because his father was that day going to, or right around that time, going to that other family, and he was going there, and because he would have that Titan, like, you do see Eren impacting him there, but I don't know that I think Eren literally had control of the other Titans at that moment. He had an in with, like, his dad's psyche, because his dad was going to possess and did possess certain Titans, and then Eren would as well. So he could kind of go to that moment with his dad, but he, I don't think, could control the Titans entirely at that point. So him saying, I made it go after my mom, I'm like, I feel like Ymir made it go after his mom, because this was the moment that finally she had found somebody who, if she could just sort of break something in them or transform something in them to really have this spark ignited, that was something she could then use and put down a certain path that would then lead to them coming together. That's my interpretation of it. One thing that I really have sat on this, and I'm not entirely sure my thoughts on, is the idea that Ymir saw something in Mikasa, that Mikasa would be able to break the cycle, if you will, and that she would be able to take Eren out. And I do kind of wonder if Ymir thought of, because if she's kind of sort of able to see into their minds, if she thought that her relationship, meaning Ymir herself, with the king was comparable to Eren and Mikasa's relationship. I wonder if she thought there was similarities there, and the feelings that she seemed to have sensed in Mikasa, if she was like, oh, these are the feelings I had, but then she could sense that, like, Mikasa wouldn't necessarily, that she would eventually be able to break out of that in order to do something that would ultimately be for the greater good. I don't know if that's exactly, I do feel like that kind of came a little bit out of nowhere. Is this sort of her way of finally finding someone who could eliminate the Titans for her? But I'm like, I mean, I don't know that I fully understand Ymir's motivations. I don't know if Ymir totally understands her motivations. And while I can understand that being frustrating for some people, and it is a little, for me, I'm like, I want to know a little more. I want to understand a little bit better. I also think that it's okay and that it doesn't bother me too much, because it ultimately doesn't really change the major themes that I've taken away from the show. Oh, the grave. The grave was sad. Also, the fact that she just, like, carried his head. But the grave was really sad, and Mikasa just going continuously back to it. And the flowers, I'm like, is that the tie-in that we've been getting all along? That the flowers are somehow this, like, foreshadowing of there will be an end to this all? I don't really know, but the flowers didn't turn out to be as big of a thing as I thought they would be. Then there's also a part of me, because I feel like so much of the ending almost inherently makes you want to theorize. There's a part of me that's like, oh, is there some kind of, like, connection with, like, the trees themselves? And wherever the parasite was, like, certain trees have the certain abilities within them. I don't know. I'm just kind of questioning, I feel like, everything at this point. It kind of sucks that after all of that, I mean, I already talked about, like, way in the future from this point, but the fact that pretty quickly after, you see so many of the characters are still having to deal with this sort of divide within their country itself, and then they're kind of becoming these allies that are trying to basically be like, guys, don't hate us, like, it wasn't exactly us, it was, you know, this other person, but we stopped him. Jean, for example, and Reiner and these other characters, I don't know, that seems stressful. I just wanted everybody to be able to relax. Poor Mikasa, though. I do feel really bad for her. It kind of seemed like maybe she ended up having, like a quiet little life in the end. And again, I'm so frustrated the screen was small because I couldn't see very well. But I'm like, did she have a family? Was it with Sean? I don't really know. I couldn't tell. But the fact that she continuously goes back to the grave is very sad. It was an ending. I understand, of course, why it is a controversial one. But I think as a whole, Attack on Titan, I'm not going to go into an entire series review right in this moment because I wanted this to be dedicated primarily to just this finale. But phenomenal for me. I loved it. I am kind of like almost wondering if I were to go back and watch my very first impressions of it, if I'd be like, oh, I was so stupid. I don't know. There's a part of me that's like, how many theories was I right on? I feel like I pieced together certain things pretty well. Certain things I feel like are almost impossible. I would be very surprised if anybody's like, I feel like that tall guy looks like that giant colossal titan from the beginning. Like, I would be kind of shocked if people picked up on that very quickly. But there are certain things that I feel like I kind of, some of the things that were alluded to and hinted at the beginning, which does make me feel like all of this was meant to go in this direction from the start, looking back and reflecting. But I almost feel like the beginning was hinting at the end a lot. And then it sort of got more, you kind of got sucked into almost like interpersonal relationships and the excitement of like, oh my gosh, what's this like new big titan? Wait a second, is that Annie girl? And like, you get really invested in that stuff. And then some of the bigger picture things that you might be theorizing about initially almost get put off to the side so then you can forget. But I do really like how it was structured. I liked how it was done. If I were to try and pinpoint my favorite parts of the show, I still think I have a special place in my heart for the last arc of the third season. I thought it was great. I did enjoy getting to see sort of the coup that was also within season 3. So pretty much all of the more Erwin-oriented arcs I really, really loved. I didn't really care about the Krista royal family arc quite that much. I feel like the opening of the show was a lot happening really fast. And then once we got into it, I feel like once the Annie stuff happened with the female Titan, then I was getting really quite invested. As I said, those 2 Erwin arcs within the third season were so good. The everything where you're like, what the heck is happening when Reiner and other Ymir and Berthold are, it turns out to be Titans. That's very much when you're like, what the heck? And then for this last season, I by no means think it went downhill or anything like that. I think that the best way to capture my thoughts on the last season is it became a lot more bird's eye view. It became a lot more thematic, when before I think it was a lot more tied to the characters. And I typically am not the biggest fan of that because I am such a character-driven reader or just somebody who engages with stories. I usually want to be more focused in with the characters. But I do feel like these themes were not only very important, but I thought really well done, especially like everything with Reiner at the beginning of season 4. I feel like that was exceptional. I think that so much of how we had everything be full circle and the way in which the themes played out and the devastation and the level that you are forced to watch what true devastation looks like, what oppression looks like, what dehumanization looks like, I will just always, I think, really appreciate and respect and be grateful for the fact that it decided to go in this direction. Was it the most entertaining? No. The last season was not the most entertaining. It wasn't maybe my favorite as far as like individual character, like, yeah, moments or anything like that. But it was, I think, it turned it into something else, and it's not something I'm upset about. And on that note, that's it for some thoughts on the last collection of episodes of Attack on Titan. There is a part of me that feels like this is very bittersweet to have finally gotten through it all, but here we are. It was quite a roller coaster, As I said, as a reminder, I would love to hear your interpretations and thoughts about the ending or just some of these last arc thoughts, whatever you have on them. Feel free to leave those over in the community tab post. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks for continuing to watch as we made our way through. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.